Poltronieri, which we've called Co-Location Dubai Expo and Leicester, for reasons which I'll come on to shortly. I'm Tracy Harwood, the Art AI Festival Director, and we're joined this evening by our YouTube channel by festival partners Chris Tyrer, who is the Digital Programme Manager at Phoenix in Leicester, and Luba Elliott, who is the festival curator. Now, Chris and Luba will pass your questions through to us, so please do add them into the chat, and I will pose them to Ernest and Fabrizio after both presenters have spoken to us. Do please also note that we'll be recording this evening, so if you don't want to be identified in the chat, just anonymise your comments or questions, and we'll deal with that accordingly. By way of a reminder, the Art AI Festival celebrates all things creative AI, and our goal is to showcase the best artworks demonstrating AI in the public realm, working in collaboration with our partners and our venues across Leicester. Our two speakers this evening represent the highlight of this year's event, which actually began in May in Leicester. Both are also exhibiting works in the city and are simultaneously part of Montfort University's showcase of the Art AI Festival in the UK pavilion at Expo 2020 in Dubai. Ernest's work is called Cities Tango and Fabrizio's is called ArchXtonic. And this evening, both are going to be talking about their creative AI practice in relation to these works. Before I hand over to our first speaker, though, let me begin by introducing them to you. Firstly, Ernest Edmonds. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with his work. Ernest is a pioneer computer artist for whom combining creative arts practice with creative technologies has been a lifelong pursuit. In 2017, he won the Association of Computing Machinery's SIGGRAPH Distinguished Artist Award for Lifetime Achievement in Digital Art. The only other UK artist to be so recognised is the late Harold Cohen. His transdisciplinary achievements are demonstrated by the fact that in the same year, he also was awarded the ACM SIGG Lifetime Achievement Award for practice in human-computer interaction. He has shown his work internationally for over 50 years and has recently exhibited in Venice, London, Denver, Vancouver, Beijing, Shanghai, and Rio. He is also Emeritus Professor of Computational Art at De Montfort and Chairman of the Board of the annual International Symposium on Electronic Art that began in 1988. He has published over 400 books and papers, and his most recent book, The Art of Interaction, What HCI Can Learn from Interactive Art, published by Morgan and Claypole, was only published very recently. He is founding editor of the Journal of Knowledge-Based Systems, an honorary editor of Leonardo, and editor-in-chief of Springer's Cultural Computing book series. He recently commented that Cities Tango, Leicester and Dubai, is the latest in a series of works that began with Communications Game, shown in the Invention of Problems 2 exhibition at Leicester Polytechnic, which was formerly, that was the name formerly given to Montfort University in 1971. This artwork began when he asked with Stroud Cornock whether an artist would be amplified or superseded by computers. And it's been something he and other creative computing practitioners have been exploring ever since. And hopefully he'll give us some more insight into that this evening. Now, the second speaker is another person that has also been exploring that very same question, Fabrizio Poltronieri. Fabrizio is an award-winning computer artist, designer, researcher, writer, and curator with international experience and a special interest in the relationships between art, design, digital media, gamification, and technology. His expertise lies in the development of creative coding and its exchanges with philosophical questions. He is a member of the Institute of Creative Technologies at De Montfort, where I'm also a member. He also teaches creative coding at the IOCT. He has participated in international exhibitions such as at Arts Electronica in Linz, has presented artworks and live performances that plays with the relationship between machine and man. His artworks are in prominent collections such as that of the V&A Museum in London, including artworks from his Visual Theogonies series. He has a PhD in semiotics from the Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. He is also an expert on the work of Willem Flusser, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, having written many articles about Flusser's philosophical concepts. His current focus is on creative AI, applying machine and deep learning techniques to the production and design of narratives, moving images and objects, ArchXtonic exemplifying his current practice. So without further delay, I'll hand you firstly to Ernest, and then we'll move on to Fabrizio, and each are going to be speaking for about 20 minutes each, and then we'll move on to a Q&A session. So Ernest, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm going to share my screen and then I will start talking. Okay, so I'm now doing that. Here we go. Right, so yes, Cities Tango, the version of it that we are seeing at this time is called Leicester+Dubai because it connects together those two cities. I'll explain how it does that connecting as I proceed. And it's shown in various places. This is it on the screen at the Art and Design building at Montfort University. But it's important to say the context is that it's part of the Art AI Festival in Leicester and also in the UK pavilion at the Expo 2020 in Dubai. And I'm going to go through some of the background to this briefly before I talk about the work in detail. A whole stream of my work, not all of it, but one stream of my work is basically network art, where the participants, the audience, if you like, interact with one another in a sense through the art system. And this is a concept that I began, as Tracy indicated, 50 years ago, and showed this piece called Communications Game, which was in the art gallery that preceded what we now have as the gallery. But in the old days, there was another art gallery in the preceding building to the one that big screen is on. This was just a set of switches and lights in booths, and people could go into these booths and throw the switches and the lights would come on and off and so on. And there was no algorithm shown to them, but in fact, the switches were affecting other people's lights and so on. So they were kind of communicating with one another in a very limited, kind of restricted way. Called Communications Game. Remember 1971, because that was when communication was in the air. The internet really got going in 1974, and Ethernet, the standard local area network, in 73. And the first Arpanet demonstration, Arpanet preceded internet, it was the initial system, was first demonstrated in 72. So when I made this work in 71, there was a lot going on in the world in terms of research and thinking about these kinds of things. And it was my interest to take that thinking into art. Well, I won't go on about that work. It's 50 years old now, but anyway, it was interesting and it got me going in this direction. One other thing I should mention that happened much later was I started to make these pieces called Shaping Forms. I started these in 2007. And in these pieces, I had a computer driving a screen with ever-changing images according to various rules that I set up about how they should change, how the colors should change, how the timings would evolve, and so on and so forth. But in addition to having the computer controlling the screen, the computer was also capturing data from a camera. And you can see someone there waving at the camera, in fact. And the important thing is that this meant that the work was interactive, but it used concepts of evolution and learning in the program. so that not only did the screen react to someone moving in front of it or waving at it or something, but also it slowly changed its rules as time passed, as a result of the experiences that the artwork had, you might say, with the participants, with the audience. So it was these are evolving pieces that change forever. So a few months on in an exhibition, the work is different to in the beginning. I mention that because, in fact, I brought this kind of work together with the communications game work a couple of years after I started those pieces. And in 2009, I showed my first Cities Tango work. This was connecting Belfast to Sydney. So there were two parts to this artwork. One part was sitting in Belfast and the other part was sitting in an art gallery in Sydney. And of course, by 2009, all the technology had moved on dramatically. So the internet provided me with the infrastructure that I could use to do this. Now, here's what could be seen in Sydney. And the thing to say about this is that it is interactive. There's a camera there looking into the audience, looking at us if we're standing there looking at the screen like that, and detecting movements. And so the work was interactive with the audience in that location, like shaping form. But also that information was being sent to Belfast, and what was happening in Sydney was affecting what people saw in Belfast, and vice versa. So this was using the shaping form idea, but adding to it the communications notion. I used images of each place, sometimes real-time images, sometimes stored photographs. They're used in a kind of abstract way, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. Here's a little movie of the Belfast end of it. And sometimes you see strange images, someone moving, sometimes there's a photograph of the city recognizable. And sometimes you just see colors. So the background is that I started to develop a whole series of works which were distributed. In fact, sometimes more than two locations could be connected together. But let me just jump now to this year and Cities Tango, Leicester+Dubai. I want to spend a few moments talking about this work. As you've seen, sometimes you can see it on this big screen here in the Montfort University. And also in Leicester, you can see it in the depot, in the window of the depot in the street there. And you have to fly to see the whole work because the other part of the work is here in the UK pavilion in Dubai. And this is an example of what can be seen in Dubai. So now I'm just going to show you some clips of what the work looks like. First of all, I'm going to show you what it looks like in Leicester, and then I'll show you what it looks like in Dubai. And as I show these, I'll talk a bit more about what's really going on in these works. So this is the kind of thing you can see in Leicester. Well, it's important to say, as you can probably guess from this, that my work is really in the abstract minimalist tradition. I'm concerned with colour, shape and form. And in fact, in these pictures, I'm using photographs as abstract entities, really. Okay. So it isn't really about those locations. It's just providing a more complex image that is being manipulated. The rules that are being used and being modified by people's movements determine things like which picture to show, when it's shown, what the colours are that are being used. and the colours are being manipulated quite carefully, you probably can already see that in some cases, the colours are very close together. In fact, you see in the middle there, two quite close together, and so on. And then there's another colour which is really very different. So there's usually a mixture of a set of colours that are very close together and some other colour that's really quite different, as a sort of oddball thrown in. The differences between these colours are slightly greater for this kind of work than for those shaping forms, because the shaping forms are intended for a domestic environment where you can see very carefully and closely what the colours are. But on these big screens and in the street and so on, you can't see that subtlety so easily. So we could imagine these works as just film, abstract film, based around the images in a particular location. Now I'm going to move it to Dubai. When you're in Dubai, this is what you might see. And these movements then are kind of creating an abstract work created partly by the participants, by the people who see it. And Cities Tango also changes like shaping form over time, so that it kind of learns to modify the colours according to what goes on in the spaces in front of the work, the space in front of the work in Dubai and the space in front of the work in Leicester. So it's an evolving piece. If you come and see it in a few weeks, you'll see it's slightly different to how it is today. The timings and so on are in fact based on various mathematical principles, rather like Bach created his music using mathematical principles to help him organize in some quotes meaningful way how it would look and how it would behave. And I do the same. So the software behind this, there's AI behind this, doing the learning and making the changes. And also, of course, basic AI, recognizing what's going on in front of the cameras. And there's also mathematics giving order and regularity, if you like, to what is seen. Hopefully, what is seen is beautiful. There's no requirement here to think about AI or mathematics. It's all employed in order to make art, which is to be looked at and appreciated in various ways. Now, I want to thank a few people here. Obviously our sponsors, the festival and the Montfort University, but Sean, Tim and Mohammed in different ways have done important work to enable me to put this particular piece together. And Tracy, of course, has been and is working really hard. Without Tracy and her work, none of this would happen. And I've not said much about my work, but you can find out more should you be interested. And here are two books that might be interesting from that point of view. The first is by Francesca Franco, and that's a book about my work. So a lot of the stuff is explained in her book. There, quite recently come out in paperback. And then I've written a book with Professor Margaret Bowden about digital art, about the writing of software, about AI in art, and included in it interviews with quite a few artists, from pioneers to young people working today who write code in making their art. So this book deals with the philosophy, the practice of digital art. And I'm going to conclude here stressing this point that what we're seeing is abstract art that connects locations together, that enables groups of people to interact with one another through the system. You can't see all of the work at any one time. That is conceptually impossible because of the way I've done it. But here we are, Cities Tango, Leicester, Dubai. And I'm now going to stop sharing the screen and pass back to Tracy.
Thank you very much for that fascinating insight. I'm sure we've got questions, but I think what we'll do is reserve the questions until after we've also heard from Fabrizio. So Fab, I'll hand over to you now, if that's all right.
Yes, sure. Well, let me share my screen, see how I coordinate that. Here we go. So, well, I would like to start saying good afternoon to everyone, and also doing thanking some people. Especially I would like to say thanks to Trace for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be part of the Artificial Intelligence Art Festival. Luba, Sean, who is coordinating the technical part, Mohamed, of course, who helped us in Dubai. I would also like to thank the MU, the Montfort University, and I would like to especially thank Professor Craig Vare, who is my partner. We have been developing a lot of creative AI artworks and research in the last 5 years, and a very special thanks to Ernest, who is always an inspiration for me, and is always an honor to speak in the same space as Ernest. Well, it's about artwork that, as Ernest is in Dubai, so you have to fly to see it there, and also in 2 locations here in Leicester, in the Haymarket Shopping, and also in a huge projection every night in the Green Dragon Square. So my artwork is ArchXtonic. I like to call it Dreaming of Utopian Cities. And I would like to start giving you guys a little background about me. I'm a mathematician. My first degree was in maths. And the thing is, I use maths and algorithmics to create some controlled chaos, or sometimes just pure chaos. So this particular artwork is in between a completely chaos and a controlled chaos generated by some neural networks and also some symbolic AI. So I always like to mix these 2 different AI approaches. I also a programmer. I have been writing creative code since I was a child, since I was 8 years old. And particularly in this field of creative AI, I have been doing research about creative AI and also artworks using creative AI for more than 2 decades now. This is, to be honest, part of a practice-based research that I have been conducting since doing since 2015. So it's an artwork that I have been developing for more or less 6 years now. This particular one is a little bit different because, of course, it's interaction. It's something about Dubai and Leicester. So I had to adjust a couple of things for this particular artwork to make sense in this context. And what I mean by a practice-based research is that my practice as an artist, here in this case, informs my research into creative AI. As Tracy mentioned, in the very beginning, when she introduced me, an expert in work of Husserl, who was a Brazilian / Czech philosopher who dealt with many very important concepts. Is still very relevant nowadays, and I would say that his thought, the concepts he worked with are even more relevant now than when he wrote in the 17th, 18th, and 19th. So my initial question with this artwork, with this piece of research, was to discover what kind of aesthetics could emerge from very banal city image, and how such image could serve as a creative source to feed my creative AI practice. I always like to start my projects and my works, my artworks, with a philosophical question. This is very important for me. I don't consider myself a philosopher, but many authors, many philosophers influenced me. The way I think, the way I see technology, the way I put things together, the way I write codes, the way I do my creative thinking, and so far and so on. And in this particular case, there is some articles and books and texts by Willem Flusser where he deals with the concept of apparatus. And one of the things that he says about apparatuses is that they are coded, they are programmed to frame our vision, to frame our cognition, to frame the way we see the world in a very particular way. And this way is out of our control as users, as people using the apparatus, because there is, I will not get into the very philosophical aspects of that, but basically he says, for example, when you see a picture of the Tower Eiffel in Paris, it's not, in 99% of the case, a picture that reveals in a very phenomenological way the thinking and what the eye of the photographer saw, but it reveals the vision inside the apparatus, the vision that was coded, encoded, programmed inside the apparatus. So my idea for this particular artwork was to start to explore this idea using video. So I have been traveling a lot, especially I am Brazilian, but I have been living in Europe for 1 decade now, and especially when I moved to Europe, I started to travel around the world, and every time I travel, I take with me a video camera, most of the time the same video camera, a very compact Blackmagic Cinema pocket camera, the first version. And then what I do, it's basically, I leave the camera in a random position, in a random place, and I don't look through the viewfinder. I just press the record, and the camera start recording what is framed by its own algorithm. So I leave the camera filming most of the time until the battery runs out, and I collected more than 20 terabytes of data, of images from different parts of the world: China, Europe, South America, North America. The only continent, not the only continent, but a continent that is really missing is Africa. I haven't got the opportunity to go there yet. And then my idea was always see what I can do with these memories straight from the apparatus memories. And then I start to think, well, it would be great if I could reconstruct some narratives, video narratives, using these recordings as raw source of image. And then I could, I would be able to build a computer narrative, a computer video, a computer film with only using image from another apparatus. So basically, it is what I consider. I have got a PhD in semiotics, so semiotics always play an important role in my practice as well. So my one of my questions or hypotheses always was, well, what could emerge from the discussion between these two kinds of digital minds, the mind inside my computer and the mind inside the camera, because from a semiotic point of view, these two are also embedded with minds, kinds of mind. And then what I did in very practical terms was to start to explore different computer vision algorithms in order to segmentate the image and separate the very elements in each frame. So for example, in a seed landscape, we would have cars, people, buildings, trees, and so forth and so on. So to build new narratives from these frames, I would need to separate, to segmentate them. And after many years, because this is something that I started in 2015, many years working with different kinds of algorithms and write my own algorithms, I start to use neural networks to help me to segmentate the image. So for example, here we have one building here from Leicester. This is part of the DMU campus. And what this kind of algorithms do is to separate the different parts, the different elements of the image and mask them. And it's exactly what I needed. So here we have different colors for different parts of the image. I also will not go very deep into this discussion because it's a very, very technical discussion, how these algorithms do that and so forth and so on. But what I did after, this is an ongoing process because it's still very slow. The algorithm needs to take frame by frame of each video and then segmentate the image. And then there is a MongoDB database. The algorithm says, well, in this particular frame, we have a building, we have the sky, we have trees, and so forth and so on. And it puts the positions, the mask positions, and all the information that the narrative algorithm needs in this particular database. But of course, when I say, the algorithm stores in the database, there is a building there. The image segmentation thing doesn't know anything about buildings, about skies, about trees, and so forth, so on. It uses a labeled system to identify and to categorize these elements. And this is very, very, very important because it's the next step of my artwork that is still not yet implemented, and I will tell you a little bit about that. So again, the two image one next to other, and then I wrote another AI algorithm, this time also using neural networks, but also using the some symbolic AI that I like very much because I really like to delegate control to the computer. So most of my artworks, they are really marked by the fact that I believe that the mind inside the computers can make good aesthetic decisions. And then I have another algorithm that judge the aesthetic decisions made by the first one. But on the other hand, I like to have some control over the process sometimes. And this is the reason why I also use symbolic AI. So this is one of the frames. It's the artwork itself is generated in real time. And it takes the form of a video. If you see it from the outside, the phenomenological layer of that is a video. And this is one of the frames that I took from one of the videos. Of course, every time you run the artwork, you get a different narrative. And then you can see here elements from Dubai, elements from Leicester, composing a narrative, a new scene. It's interesting because sometimes the image, the frames, they look like, you know, a possible future city, like a very, very feasible cityscape from the future, either from the future or from the past. But sometimes, and for me, this is the most interesting part, the image, the landscapes, the cityscapes look completely dystopian. And why this is very important for me? Because I also have a lot of influence from sci-fi writers, especially Philip Dick, Isaac Asimov, of course. So for me, it's very, very interesting to see how the algorithm perceive these pixels and put them together. And in terms of research, this is also interesting for me because I always work in the intersection of science, art, programming, and apparatus. And especially in terms of programming, I am a little bit old-fashioned, I would say, because I follow this school of the first artists working with computers, where the artists really needed to code in order to make their ideas feasible. And I still believe that it's very important that an artist working with computers really need to know how to code. And in terms of my research, I do believe that art can play a very important role in producing new knowledge and also in making like future scenarios clear to us now. So I do believe that and I try to do that in artwork as well. I do believe that art in reality, when you combine these two things, art that I understand as being pure fiction, and reality and science, you can produce new knowledge. And the way that I would like to advance this artwork is, as I told you, when you work with this paradigm of image segmentation as it is nowadays, of course, the computer vision system doesn't know anything about the semantic value of the masks. So I work quite hard now to add real semantics to this mix. And then instead of just finding borders in image using pixels, we would have like a truly semantic algorithm. And then it will know what in this image are buildings, skies, people, and then when it comes to generate new narratives, it can put things together in a more meaningful way. So these are the next steps for this particular artwork, that it's something that I don't foresee when I'm going to end that. So it's an open research. And just to finish my presentation, I would like to show you just a little bit of the final piece. Of course, Probably it will jump some frames here, so I will show you just some frames, and you are more than welcome to see the artwork working live in Leicester or in Dubai. Let me just share the other screen. Yeah, it's here. So this is one of the possible outcomes that you get from this artwork. Don't know if you are seeing that. Hope you are. And well, that's it. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Wow. Well, that's amazing artwork. Are you still looking at your video here? That's absolutely fascinating. Okay, well, whilst we're waiting for a few questions to come in, looks like we have a couple. You know, moderator's privilege here. I've got a couple of questions for both of you, but actually the first one I wanted to ask was of Ernest. And you know, what comes through with the work that you're doing is this, you know, you highlighted connectivity, interactivity, and communication in particular. And what I wanted to get a better handle on is how much does the audience understand about the emergent communication of the artwork when they're interacting with the work? I know you said it evolves over time, but that strikes me as something that you are aware of, and I'm just wondering how the audience learns about it from your experience of it.
Sure. Well, there are two things really. One is that for the shaping form works, people live with them, they have them. And so they notice that it's different to how it was last month, right? And people do that, certainly have said that to me. And also, I remember the first set that I made, I sent off from Sydney to Washington, DC, and they were in an exhibition for 2 months. And my friends who knew these works saw them when they came back, because when they came back from Washington, they were shown in a gallery in Sydney. And they all remarked at how different they were. So if you see it over time, and of course, the same thing can happen here. And I have this notion that showing something in the street, which is the same this week, next month, is pretty boring and it won't attract attention. I'm very interested in what gets people interested, what engages people. And one of the things we know engages people a great deal, and software developers know this very well, is change. If things get different. So I do believe people notice these things, but also I'm trying to make sure that that somewhere or another there is some documentation to tell people this so that they can also think about it, right? But it's not my goal that people should, in quotes, understand or get a message. The goal is that they experience the art. And it may be that they don't realize this is happening, but they do find it engaging, and they may not quite realize why they find it engaging, and that's fine.
That's really fascinating. So they're not really aware of the agency that they have with the work itself. But because the one thing I suppose really that strikes me about it also is the different cultural representations that you have at each end of the artwork. So here in Leicester, for example, we're not experiencing local things, we're experiencing things from Dubai. And that's very different cultural Experience to what you would experience in Leicester, which you will be getting in Dubai. So those are kind of interesting dynamics, I think, that are playing out in that work. And obviously,
I think that's a very interesting point. I think that that's an important element.
Thank you for that. Fab, the question I've got for you, just from what you were saying there, and I, you know, you probably already got it. You've already said something about it, but you didn't really explain exactly how this works. But when you apply the segmentation masks onto the images that you've got, clearly, there is a semantic relationship between sky and building and tree and window and what have you. But you said you hadn't got as far as programming that in yet. So now I've seen the images that are coming through ArchXtonic, and the buildings are in the right, they're upright, so they're not laying on their side. The sky is above the buildings, and the lakes and things and the boats are actually at the bottom of the images. So how is the artwork doing that? Yes, you're muted.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Tracy. And I would like to apologize. I saw that some people are complaining about the quality of my audio, and I think that is a problem with my internet, which was supposed to be a super high speed fiber optic, but in fact it's not. So sorry, guys. Yeah, it's a good question because first, the original artwork works with video fragments. So when you see, for example, someone or a building, it's in movement because it uses video fragments. But for this particular one, mainly because of COVID, as you know, we struggle a little bit to get a good image from Dubai and Leicester, and then at the end we decided, well, let's do that using photography, static image. So this is also part of my explanation. To be honest, I like best to do very, very chaotic artworks, where things don't make much sense. But then I thought, well, this is something that will be on display in a shopping center and in Dubai, in the UK pavilion. So this time let's have something more controlled. I think that it would be, best for people to engage with the artwork and also to understand what's going behind the scenes. So in this case, this is the reason why I also told that I used some symbolic AI. I programmed it by hand. I hard-coded a couple of rules, and then this is the reason why the things appear to be in the, let's say, correct order. I say correct order because it's the correct order for our perception, but not necessarily for a computer's perception, if that exists at all. And when I say that the next steps would be to have more semantic rules inside the algorithm, it means that I would not have to do that by itself or not. So that's the thing. And then it opens other possibilities, especially to build, for example, real-time landscapes or cityscapes for video games and things like that.
Lots of potential, actually. And to that point, really, there's a question here from Ben Bogart, who's basically saying, are semantics possible in a machine, or do we merely attribute semantics to machines?
Yes, I would say that maybe it's possible in the future, but we are very far away of that. So yeah, we need to train the machines, and this is good. This is the good side of neural networks because, well, it still relies most of the algorithms in like humans labeling. I think that most of people know about that. But if you train, you can, of course, have the computer doing that, but not the computer by itself. But I think that it's a great, step forward in terms of having this kind of features, then using symbolic AI, hard coding everything. It's just impossible.
Yes, a lot of work. A general question for you both then. Given the amount of time you spend doing this, what is it that you spend most of your time on when creating these kinds of artworks? And I suppose related to that, has your perception of creativity and your own creative practice changed as a result of working with AIs?
So,
Ernest, do you want to start that?
Okay. What do I spend most of my time doing? Probably looking out of the window, making a cup of coffee, and so on. It's very, I always like Clive James's comment. He said that a writer at work is someone who looks just ready to put the rubbish out. Okay, and that's how it is. And I think that people imagine that the coding is the big thing. Well, sometimes it is, because sometimes it's a mess, or you can't work out how to do it, or they've changed the operating system and you haven't realized, and things like that. So all those things can take up quite a bit of time. But the biggest time is in the thinking about what to do at all. And in my case, the question that you asked me at the beginning is a very important one. To what extent should the artwork kind of reveal to the participants its awareness of their behavior and so on, things like that? So working out those things, sometimes it takes years to do that. And does it change the practice? Yes, it does, because I think that the interesting thing is that I found through, I started painting, with oil paints and brushes and things before I came across the possibility of using computers. And there's a change in the speed with which you can do things and the rate with which you can try out different underlying structures, what Fabrizio said, what lies behind it. And that change of speed of what you can do and experiment with is so great that it's a different order of practice, so you can think differently. And I like to say that perhaps I can think more deeply about what's the underlying structures and so on of the artwork than I could before.
And Fab, do you want to tackle that?
Well, my process quite similar to the one Ernest described it, and I would just add that on the top of that, I spend a lot of time just playing around and experimenting things with computers, with the computer. If I use sensors or like Arduinos or something like that, I like to experiment new things, and I think that this is one of the amazing sides of coding, because there is not just one way of doing things. There are many ways. So I just spend time experimenting, trying new things, trying new approaches and things like that. And sometimes the results are really new. And I think that as a mathematician, it's something that is hard for me to just, let it go. But I always think, well, what is the problem to be solved here, and how can I solve this problem? So I spend a lot of time just experimenting new ways of solving the problems that I pose to myself.
Indeed. And to that point, I'm just thinking about the future of being an artist in our modern world, really. And a question that's come up throughout this series of talks in different ways has been to do with NFTs and, the way people might be using NFTs to claim the authenticity of the work and what have you. What would your view on the use of NFTs be? Or is this something that you don't factor into what you're doing? I mean, Ernest has been in the game for many years. Maybe it's not something that you need to worry about. But Fabrizio, I think you've probably been looking at NFTs and the role of. What's your views on it?
Well, I'm going to start this one. Well, if your question has to do with making a living as an artist, I would say that It's very, very difficult, as everybody knows. And this is something that I don't aim to making a living as an artist because, well, in my view, you need to spend a lot of time doing networks and things like that instead of doing your practice. So I decided long ago that, well, I love to work at a university, I love to teach, I love to be in touch with students, and most of all, I love to do research. And in my point of view, my practice and my research are really, really interconnected, if not the same thing. So I decided, well, the university, I have my job, I do my exhibitions. If I sell my artwork or not, I would love to sell, but if not, that's fine. Regarding NFTs, well, this is a quite controversial topic, especially because the way NFTs are produced and the way they are, well, the way they are created, most of them, there's this huge environmental impact, what I'm very concerned of course. But I think that it can be a good alternative for artists, if artists can somehow, what it's very, very complicated, escape this big scenario, this big environment dominated by galleries. That's the point, because then you will also have, well, a reproduction of the same old market, the same old art market, dominated by few guys and few artists and so forth and so on. So some websites, especially a Brazilian one whose name is unpronounceable because I don't remember, it's a Latin name. It's a good alternative because the thing is, it's a place where artists rule the website and things like that. So I think that if we solve somehow, and there are already some alternatives, this problem with the huge waste of electricity and resource in producing NFTs, I think that it can be a nice space for artists to explore. And I have been exploring this space myself.
So perhaps I can add a comment on top of that, that it has to be recognized that the NFTs are essentially associated with selling files, selling digital data. And speaking not just for myself, but as I mentioned, I've published interviews with quite a lot of artists, including quite a few pioneers recently, and I've talked with many artists, young and old. And I would say that the majority, the vast majority, still see the physical object. In other words, not just the file, but how the file is presented. If it's on a monitor, they care about the monitor, right? They care what kind of frame it's in, and so on and so forth. So that artists, if you take pioneers, people like Harold Cohen or Manfred Moore, they make objects. The software behind those objects, but it's the object itself and not the file that is the artwork. That's not true of everyone, of course. And so this is the first thing to decide. What is it that the artist considers to be their artwork? Is it a file or is it an object? And that makes a big difference about whether or not NFTs are of use.
Which is a really, really good point, and leads me to my next question, probably my last question given the time, is what do you see as the future of creative AI practice, and what are the implications for collectors and curators if what you're talking about, and this reflects something that Ben has just asked as well in the chat, which is your artwork about process, as you just said, or output, so to speak? What are the implications for collectors and curators with creative AI artwork, or however you see it?
Well, maybe I'll start that one. I'm not quite sure. It's a rather complex question, but what is the future of creative AI? Let's just look at that. I think the important thing is to understand that its future is in supporting human thinking and human creativity, not replacing it. And this is a very big issue that lots of people are debating and have been debating for decades, many decades. But I think it's very important, and I want to stress this point. The idea of simply kind of like replacing the lawyer or the accountant or the artist by an AI machine isn't the goal that we should be looking for. We should be looking at enhancing human creativity, and creative AI does enhance human creativity if it's used in the right way. And that is the big future, I think. And then I think for the collector, well, obviously people are exploring what to do about digital files, but most artists still produce something which is a kind of object. It may be a machine, it may be a painting or whatever. And that means that in the end of the day, it doesn't change it very much. But from the artist's point of view, I mean, that's the third thing that cropped up in this question was, well, it's all about process. I mean, the objects are just like little experiments on a route that is a lifelong quest to understand more and to perceive more. That's me.
Yeah, well, you asked something, Tracy, and I'm going to reply something different.
Naturally.
Well, but in the very direction, in accordance with Ernest's response, I completely agree with him. I'm not interested at all in machines or algorithms replacing humans in any kind of form, especially in the creative realm, but I'm very much interested in having machines that challenge us as artists or creative designers, architects, machines that challenge our creativity and make us more creative, and then machines that also can learn with us, and then they will challenge us much more. And this is basically, as you and Ernest know, what I researching at IOCT in these 5 years that I there, especially with Professor Craig, with Craig there. We have now a couple of research projects in this direction. As for example, one involving jazz musicians and an AI system that plays along with the musicians, but not to replace a bass player or a guitarist or a drummer, but to propose new language and see how the humans react to that, and then how the AI reacted to the humans' reaction. So I do believe it can be a little bit naive of my part, but I do believe in my research is directed at having more and more machines helping us in this sense, making us more and more creative.
Thank you. That's fascinating answers to the questions. Well, I'm very conscious of time. It's 3 minutes past 7 already. I think we need to wrap up this evening. So I just wanted to say thank you to both our speakers this evening, and to Luba and Chris for hosting the YouTube channel, and also to Sean Clark of Interactive Digital Arts, who's been our technical support for this evening on the Zoom and also on the YouTube. You can find out more about our events and programme on the festival's website, www.art-ai.io, and we are posting regular updates on our social channels, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. I do hope you will have a chance to see Ernest and Fabrizio's artworks in Leicester or in Dubai. Both are running for the full 6 months of the Expo, to the end of March next year. Cities Tango is running at LCB Depot and at Montfort on the LED screen on the VJ Patel building if you're on campus. And ArchXtonic is running at Haymarket Shopping Centre and Green Dragon Square. The works are running in the main concourse in the UK pavilion at Expo 2020 in Dubai. Now, this is the final talk of this year's formal online programme. And I just wanted to say you can catch up with all of our artist talks, as well as tasters of the artworks themselves, including, we just filmed Ernest at the weekend, and we'll be filming Fabrizio shortly. And those tasters of those artworks will also be on our YouTube channel. You're very welcome to catch up with those, as well as any of the talks. And finally, I would just like to extend our grateful thanks to our sponsors and partners for their amazing support this year. It's been a long year since we kicked this off in May. To the Arts Council England, to Montfort University, to Phoenix, to High Cross, to Luba, and to Leicester City Council, as well as the many venue partners and our technical partners, without whose support our festival would just not happen. So thank you all very much, and good night.